Ever wonder how a dusty frontier town with wooden buildings stood a chance against ruthless outlaw gangs? These settlements weren't just random collections of saloons and general stores. They were survival communities built on grit, strategy, and the kind of frontier justice that made bandits think twice. Their power wasn't just in their guns, it was in their unity. And it all started with one critical decision: where to build the town. These pioneers chose locations with natural advantages whenever possible. River crossings, mountain passes, and elevated plateaus gave defenders clear sight lines for miles. The ultimate frontier advantage: spot trouble coming from a day's ride away while you're still sipping your morning coffee. At towns like Tombstone, Arizona, builders positioned settlements on high desert ground that forced approaching riders to cross open terrain. Water sources provided both survival necessity and strategic control. Towns near the only water hole for 50 miles controlled who came and went. Approach routes were deliberately funneled through main streets where every window could hide a rifle. Some towns had only one or two entry points, while others sat with their backs against cliffs or rivers that eliminated escape routes for attackers. Nothing ruins an outlaw's day quite like realizing the town you're robbing only has one way out, and 20 armed citizens blocking it. Weather worked as a defensive ally, too. Winter blizzards would trap outlaws in the open while summer dust storms reduced visibility to nothing. Towns in Texas dealt with flash floods that could turn dry creek beds into raging torrents within minutes. The natural terrain served as a psychological weapon as well. Imagine riding for days through hostile territory, only to find a town perched on a mesa with armed lookouts watching your every move. Many outlaw gangs abandoned their plans simply because the approach looked too dangerous. Records show that some raids were called off because scouts reported back that the town's position was too defensible. Forests and rock formations were preserved around settlements to restrict movement and provide cover for defending sharpshooters. Town planners sometimes even engineered the landscape, creating artificial barriers or clearing specific areas to eliminate hiding spots for approaching bandits. These natural defenses were just the beginning of a frontier town security system. Once outlaws managed to reach the actual settlement, they would face the next challenge. Once outlaws reached a frontier town after battling the terrain, they faced buildings specifically designed to withstand gunfire and provide tactical advantages. These weren't just structures. They were fortifications disguised as everyday businesses. The sheer construction would surprise most modern visitors. Many frontier buildings featured double-thick walls, sometimes 18 inches of solid timber or adobe brick. That's thick enough to stop most pistol rounds and even some rifle bullets. Frontier contractors never worried about building codes, just survival codes. This massive thickness served a practical purpose in absorbing gunfire during shootouts. Builders used a clever layered approach, constructing outer walls of thick planks, filling gaps with packed earth or sand, then adding inner walls. This created barriers both strong and somewhat flexible, able to absorb impacts without splintering completely. Many buildings featured reinforced ground floors with smaller windows positioned high off the ground. This made it difficult for attackers to shoot inside while giving defenders elevated firing positions. Sophisticated towns featured interconnected buildings where defenders could move between structures without exposing themselves to gunfire. Some builders incorporated metal sheets salvaged from wagons or mining equipment into walls where outlaws might concentrate their fire. These reinforced sections would deflect bullets, alerting defenders to where attacks were focused. Frontier alarm systems, no bells required, just the ping of lead hitting steel. Second-story structures were built to overhang the street, creating covered walkways below. These weren't just for shade. Defenders could shoot downward through gaps in the floorboards, creating deadly crossfire zones. The general store in Dodge City featured floor hatches specifically designed for this purpose. While these sturdy buildings could withstand tremendous punishment, resourceful outlaws often targeted the most vulnerable point in any town's defenses. But even the weakest spots often found their match in the town's next line of defense. The main street wasn't just a road, it was a killing field carefully designed to trap unwary outlaws. Town planners transformed what could have been a vulnerability into one of the frontier's most effective defensive strategies. A typical main street consisted of multiple defensive layers: First came the wide open space, usually 60 to 80 feet across. This wasn't for wagon traffic. It was to create a no man's land where riders had nowhere to hide. Behind this came the boardwalks, elevated wooden sidewalks that gave defenders height advantage and solid footing. But the true danger lay in the buildings themselves. Every window, every door, every rooftop could conceal an armed citizen. The most crucial defensive element was the crossfire setup. Buildings on opposite sides of the street were positioned so defenders could shoot across at angles, catching outlaws in devastating crossfire. Many advanced towns featured 2 or 3 intersecting streets, creating multiple kill zones. Frontier architects invented the world's first tactical urban warfare zones, long before military strategists had a fancy name for it. The second-story balconies weren't just for show. These elevated positions allowed riflemen to fire down onto the street below. Some balconies at major towns like Deadwood extended 6 feet beyond the building face, creating perfect sniper nests. Nothing says, "You picked the wrong town," quite like rifle barrels appearing from every window above you. Hitching posts lined the streets, but their placement was strategic. They forced riders to dismount in specific areas, usually directly in front of the sheriff's office or marshal's station, where they could be watched. The entire street layout usually featured a slight curve or bend that prevented outlaws from seeing the full length of the town, disorienting them and preventing easy escape routes. Some town designers added devious psychological elements like false storefronts, convincing-looking buildings that were actually just facades with armed defenders behind them. Frontier catfishing, when that attractive saloon turns out to be a deadly trap. The most cunning trick was the dead-end alley, narrow passages between buildings that looked like escape routes but actually led to brick walls or fenced yards. Outlaws who fled down these alleys found themselves cornered with angry townspeople blocking the only exit. While the main street represented a formidable ground-level defense, a town's full defensive potential couldn't be realized without utilizing its most obvious advantage: height. Height offered a crucial advantage in frontier warfare, and town defenders used this principle to devastating effect. The tops of buildings and specially constructed towers were sophisticated weapons platforms designed to rain bullets upon outlaws. The most recognizable feature of frontier defense was the bell tower or watchtower. These structures rose 30 to 50 feet above street level, giving lookouts unobstructed views of approaching riders. Behind wooden railings, defenders could move quickly around the perimeter while staying protected. Shooting from above gave defenders a significant edge. Riflemen could fire from 300 yards away with Winchester repeaters, while sharpshooters with Sharps rifles handled targets at even greater distances. Some towers featured sandbag barriers arranged to create overlapping fields of fire. Heavier weapons included small cannons or swivel guns. Towns that could afford them kept these mounted on reinforced platforms. A single blast of grape shot could scatter an entire outlaw gang. Simple physics made for terrifying weapons. A rifle bullet fired downward from 40 feet hits with increased velocity and accuracy. Defenders used hot tar, boiling water, or heated sand to pour from upper windows. Contrary to popular belief, oil was too expensive for regular use. Hot sand would get under clothing, causing excruciating burns, while boiling water could scald attackers through their shirts. Church steeples served double duty as both religious symbols and sniper positions. The steeple at the church in Lincoln, New Mexico featured rifle ports disguised as decorative ventilation holes. Pray for your soul on Sunday, defend it with a rifle on Monday. Rooftop access was carefully controlled. Most buildings had internal ladders or stairs leading to the roof, with trap doors that could be barred from above. This prevented outlaws from gaining the high ground if they managed to enter a building. While these elevated defenses made direct assaults nearly suicidal, determined outlaws often tried to approach under cover of darkness. This led town defenders to develop yet another critical defense system. Approaching a frontier town at night wasn't as simple as riding in quietly. Between outlaws and those wooden buildings typically lay a carefully designed perimeter that turned darkness into a defender's advantage. Most towns established a clear zone extending 100 to 200 yards from the outermost buildings. This area was deliberately kept free of brush, rocks, or anything that could provide cover. Trees were cut down, tall grass was cleared, and debris was removed. This open ground forced anyone approaching to cross exposed terrain, where moonlight or lantern light would reveal them. The ultimate frontier security system. If you can see it, you can shoot it. Defensive ditches worked effectively in some locations. These shallow trenches, 3 to 5 feet deep, were dug around town perimeters. They weren't meant to stop riders completely, just slow them down and force them into predictable crossing points where defenders concentrated their fire. Barbed wire, invented in 1874, revolutionized frontier defense. Towns quickly adopted it, stringing barriers around their perimeters. This cheap, effective obstacle could stop horses and tear up anyone trying to cross on foot. Lighting was crucial for nighttime defense. Towns maintained fire barrels, large metal drums filled with wood that could be quickly lit to illuminate the perimeter. Some wealthy towns even installed early electric arc lights by the 1880s, creating brilliant pools of light that eliminated hiding spots. Guard posts were strategically positioned at town edges. These small structures, sometimes just reinforced sheds, housed sentries who worked in shifts throughout the night. Most featured rifle ports and emergency bells to raise the alarm. Interestingly, some towns used dogs as an early warning system. Packs of semi-wild dogs that lived on town scraps would bark at approaching strangers, giving defenders precious minutes of warning. While perimeter defenses excelled at detecting threats, they complemented the building fortifications we discussed earlier. Any outlaws who managed to cross these barriers would next face an even greater challenge: the town's organized response. Frontier town defenders weren't just random citizens with guns. They were organized militias with clear command structures and practiced tactics. The real power wasn't in individual gunfighters, but in coordinated community defense. First and foremost, towns established citizen committees or vigilance committees. These groups, typically led by the sheriff or marshal, assigned specific defensive roles to every able-bodied man. Some were designated sharpshooters, others served as runners carrying messages, while some handled ammunition resupply. The sheriff's office served as the command center. This building was usually the most fortified structure in town, with reinforced walls, barred windows, and multiple gun ports. It also housed the town's weapons cache and ammunition stores. Strategic positioning was crucial. Defenders were assigned to specific buildings based on their skills. The best shots went to upper floors and towers. Experienced fighters took positions covering the main street. Younger or less experienced men guarded secondary positions or served as reserves. Towns conducted regular drills, especially after hearing news of nearby raids. These practice sessions ensured everyone knew their position and role. Some towns held monthly shooting competitions that doubled as training exercises. Inside, town leaders created sophisticated communication systems. Bell codes conveyed different messages. 1 ring meant riders approaching. 3 rings meant attack. Continuous ringing meant all hands to defensive positions. Some towns used colored flags or lanterns to signal different threat levels. The most effective towns maintained detailed intelligence networks. Stagecoach drivers, telegraph operators, and traveling merchants reported outlaw movements. This information allowed towns to prepare days in advance. Knowing the Dalton gang was 50 miles north gave defenders time to fortify and prepare ambushes. Ammunition management was critical. Towns stockpiled bullets, powder, and primers in multiple locations so a single fire wouldn't destroy their entire supply. The general store, sheriff's office, and several private homes maintained emergency caches. Some towns formed mutual defense pacts with neighboring settlements. If one town was attacked, riders would race to alert others who would send reinforcements. This frontier version of calling for backup sometimes brought 50 or more armed men within hours. While these organizational advantages secured town defenders, they still needed one more crucial element to withstand prolonged standoffs: supplies. Once shooting started and outlaws took positions around town, a frontier settlement transformed from a community into a besieged fortress. The real challenge wasn't just fighting off the initial attack. It was outlasting determined criminals who might dig in for days. Water supply formed the backbone of siege survival. Town planners ensured access to wells located within the town perimeter, not outside where they could be controlled by attackers. Most frontier towns had multiple wells, typically one near the main street and others scattered throughout. Some towns were built near rivers or streams, but smart defenders never relied solely on external water sources. Wells dug 20 to 40 feet deep into the water table provided reliable supply even during dry seasons. The well at Dodge City reached 35 feet and could supply the entire town for weeks. Food storage was equally critical. General stores maintained large inventories of non-perishable goods: flour, beans, salt pork, dried beef, and canned goods. These supplies could sustain a town through weeks of isolation. Barrels of pickled vegetables, smoked meats, and hardtack-lined storage rooms. Most towns maintained food stores sufficient for at least 2 to 4 weeks, with some prepared for longer. Frontier meal prep wasn't about convenience, it was about not starving while bullets flew overhead. Medical supplies proved even more critical than food. The town doctor or barber surgeon kept stocks of bandages, laudanum for pain, whiskey for disinfection, and surgical tools. During attacks, the doctor's office or a designated building became a field hospital where wounded defenders received treatment. Ammunition represented the most vital resource. A typical defender might fire 50 to 100 rounds during a prolonged fight. Towns stockpiled thousands of cartridges in various calibers to match the different weapons citizens owned. Running out of bullets meant surrender or death. Daily life during a siege took place in cramped, tense conditions. The town population concentrated in the most defensible buildings. Families who normally lived in outlying homes moved into the main street structures. Space became precious. Saloons that normally hosted card games transformed into communal shelters. Sanitation presented challenges during extended standoffs. Towns used outhouses in normal times, but during attacks, these exterior structures became dangerous to reach. Alternative arrangements included chamber pots and designated waste areas in back rooms or cellars. The psychological impact of siege situations cannot be overstated. Fear, exhaustion, and claustrophobia affected everyone trapped inside. To combat this, town life continued with as much normalcy as possible. Women prepared meals, children were kept occupied with quiet activities, and religious leaders provided comfort. Being trapped in a frontier town during an outlaw siege was like the worst camping trip imaginable. Limited food, no privacy, constant danger, and the neighbors keep trying to kill you. While the defensive preparations we discussed earlier kept outlaws at bay, sometimes town defenders needed ways to slip out undetected. The most important exits in frontier towns were often the ones nobody could see. Behind wooden storefronts and under floorboards lurked networks of hidden passages, concealed doors, and escape tunnels that served as both emergency exits and strategic advantages. The original emergency exits didn't have glowing signs, but they did occasionally have rattlesnakes. Secret tunnels allowed defenders to slip out undetected during standoffs. These narrow passages typically emerged outside town in wooded areas, dry creek beds, or abandoned mine shafts. The town of Bodie, California featured a tunnel system connecting several buildings that wasn't discovered until the 1930s. These weren't just emergency exits, they were tactical advantages. Small groups could sneak out at night to flank outlaws, steal their horses, or sabotage their camps. Records from the 1876 standoff in Northfield, Minnesota, described townspeople using basement tunnels to outflank the James Younger gang. Most of these exits had multiple turns and low ceilings to prevent outlaws from rushing in if they discovered the passage. Some tunnels served more practical purposes, connecting saloons to hotels or banks to sheriff's offices. During peaceful times, these provided convenience. During attacks, they allowed defenders to move reinforcements quickly without crossing open streets. Trapdoors in floors led to crawl spaces or cellars that connected to adjacent buildings. A defender could enter the general store and emerge in the hotel next door without ever stepping outside. This underground network turned the entire main street into a connected fortress. False passages represented a darker aspect of these systems, deliberately designed traps for infiltrators. Some led to dead ends where enemies would be cornered. Others contained hidden pits or triggered alarms. One saloon in Tombstone featured a fake cellar door that actually opened onto a 15-foot drop into a dry well. The secrecy of these passages created vulnerability as well as strength. Several towns were infiltrated because of betrayal involving hidden entrances. In 1881, outlaws entered a bank in New Mexico through a forgotten tunnel. that connected to an abandoned building. While secret passages provided crucial advantages during attacks, the ultimate defense remained the town's ability to resist and counter the weapons and tactics that outlaws brought against them. Outlaw gangs were dangerous, but frontier town defenders weren't just sitting around waiting to be robbed. They developed countermeasures that turned raiding a town into a deadly gamble where the odds favored the house. When outlaws rode in with guns blazing, defenders would unleash coordinated volleys from multiple positions. This wasn't random shooting. It was practiced fire discipline where groups of riflemen fired in sequence, ensuring continuous fire while others reloaded. The Winchester repeater holding 15 rounds gave defenders a massive advantage over outlaws with 6-shot revolvers. A single defender could lay down more firepower than 3 outlaws combined. Nothing ruins an outlaw's day quite like realizing the shopkeeper has a rifle that shoots 15 times while you're counting your 6 bullets. Fire was a favorite defender tool. When outlaws took cover behind wagons or wooden structures, defenders would use flaming arrows or throw burning brands. Dry frontier wood caught fire quickly, forcing attackers to abandon their positions or burn. Dynamite presented a different challenge. Some outlaw gangs used explosives to blow open bank vaults or create chaos. Defenders countered by keeping buildings wet during attacks, making them harder to ignite, and by using their own explosives to create barriers or destroy cover that outlaws were using. One particularly effective tactic was the false retreat. Defenders would appear to abandon positions, luring overconfident outlaws deeper into town, where they'd be surrounded and cut down from multiple directions. The Dalton Gang fell victim to this exact strategy in Coffeyville, Kansas, in 1892. Countersniping was crucial. Towns kept their best marksmen in reserve, specifically to hunt outlaw sharpshooters. These frontier snipers would watch for muzzle flashes, then target those positions with precision fire. Some towns even maintained shooting logs, recording which windows or positions offered the best angles for different scenarios. Smoke bombs made from damp straw and green wood created thick clouds that obscured outlaw vision, while defenders, who knew the town layout by heart, could still maneuver effectively. This homemade smokescreen turned the tables on attackers. Defenders also used psychological warfare. They'd shout false information about reinforcements arriving, or exaggerate their numbers by moving between windows to create the impression of more defenders than actually existed. Frontier psychological operations, making 6 defenders sound like 60. While the previous section showed how towns use fortifications to create defensive advantages, these active countermeasures proved frontier defenders weren't just hiding behind walls. They fought back with tactics that would make modern law enforcement proud, and when all else failed, they always had one more powerful weapon in their arsenal. Success in frontier standoffs often came down to who could last the longest. Towns turned time itself into a weapon against outlaws. Patience and endurance defeated more outlaw gangs than bullets ever did. Psychological warfare was a key strategy. Defenders would cook meals in view of outlaws, making sure the smell of bacon and coffee drifted toward hungry bandits hiding in the brush. Frontier trash talk didn't need words, just a hot meal eaten casually while outlaws went hungry. Standoffs bankrupted outlaws. A gang hiding outside town couldn't rob anyone else or earn money. After days of going nowhere, many simply ran out of supplies and gave up. The siege mentality worked both ways, but towns had vastly superior resources. Weather favored defenders. Summer heat was brutal for outlaws exposed in the open with limited water. Winter cold was even worse. More outlaws gave up due to exposure than gunfire. Town residents weren't staying at luxury hotels, but compared to outlaws sleeping on the ground, they might as well have been. Town defenders mastered the waiting game. They'd occasionally fire a few shots just to keep outlaws pinned down and nervous. Sleep deprivation became a weapon. Defenders worked in shifts, staying fresh, while outlaws had to maintain constant vigilance. Reinforcements tilted the balance decisively. Telegraph systems allowed towns to call for help from U.S. Marshals, cavalry units, or neighboring settlements. The arrival of 20 fresh fighters usually ended standoffs immediately. Outlaws knew when they were beaten. The most effective defense was often patience. Historical records show that approximately 70% of outlaw raids on prepared towns ended with the criminals retreating without achieving their objectives. The risk simply outweighed the reward. Deception helped too. Defenders would display extra rifles in windows to suggest more fighters. They'd light extra lanterns at night to create the impression of a fully manned defense. The sound of hammering suggested fortifications being strengthened, even if they were just making noise. Some towns negotiated. If outlaws were trapped but still dangerous, sheriffs would sometimes offer safe passage out of town in exchange for leaving peacefully. This pragmatic approach saved lives on both sides. Better to let them leave than risk civilian casualties in a final shootout. The reputation factor cannot be overstated. Towns that successfully defended themselves gained reputations that deterred future attacks. Outlaws shared information about which towns were too dangerous to hit. One successful defense could prevent a dozen future attempts. Word spread fast in the frontier. When the Dalton gang was wiped out in Coffeyville, every outlaw in the territory heard about it within weeks. That single defensive victory made Coffeyville one of the safest towns in Kansas for years afterward. Frontier justice added another deterrent. Captured outlaws faced hanging or long prison sentences. The risk of death or imprisonment made many gangs choose easier targets. Why attack a fortified town when isolated stagecoaches and remote homesteads offered less resistance? Community solidarity was the ultimate weapon. Unlike outlaws who were bound only by greed and often betrayed each other, town defenders fought for their homes, families, and neighbors. That motivation made them willing to take risks and endure hardships that mercenary outlaws wouldn't. The combination of strategic location, fortified buildings, organized defense, adequate supplies, and sheer determination transformed vulnerable frontier settlements into formidable strongholds. These weren't just towns. They were communities that refused to be victims. While individual gunfighters like Wild Bill Hickok and Wyatt Earp captured public imagination, the real heroes of the frontier were ordinary citizens who stood together. The shopkeeper with a rifle, the doctor treating wounded defenders, the women reloading weapons, and the children running messages all played crucial roles. Frontier towns proved that civilization could take root even in the wildest territories. Their defensive strategies weren't just about survival. They were about establishing order, protecting families, and building futures in a land where violence was common but didn't have to be accepted. The legacy of these frontier defenses lives on. Modern law enforcement tactics, community watch programs, and emergency response systems all trace their roots back to those dusty streets where ordinary people became extraordinary defenders. They showed that with preparation, organization, and courage, even the most vulnerable communities could stand against the most dangerous threats. The Wild West wasn't won by lone gunfighters, it was won by communities that refused to back down, that built their towns to fight back, and that understood the most powerful weapon wasn't the fastest draw. It was people standing together, defending what they'd built, and proving that civilization was stronger than chaos.